Controlling the temperature on your barbecue can be a little bit of a tricky subject for beginners, but today I've got 7 tips to help you master it. Hi everyone, James Mackay here from Barbechoo.com and welcome back to another episode of BBQ Know. And in this episode we're talking about temperature control. This is on a charcoal barbecue. Gas I think is relatively self-explanatory, but on a charcoal barbecue people aren't quite sure just how to control that fire, so today we're going to give you some tips to help you master that. It's something I get asked about quite a lot, especially with a charcoal barbecue. People are a little bit intimidated by trying to hit certain target temperatures, and I'm not going to lie, the first few times you try it you will probably struggle to maintain that temperature, but if you put into practice the tips in this video today and stick with it, you will master it in the end. So without any further delay, let's jump straight into the first tip. So tip 1 is to aim for temperature zones rather than precise temperatures. Most recipes will give a precise temperature, but if you aim for sort of 10 degrees either side of that, you should be fine. It doesn't make that big a difference. So aim for those zones. So if you're roasting and it gives a temperature of 180, 185, anywhere in that range of 180 to 200 degrees should be fine. So aim for a wider zone, that way you're stressing out less about hitting an exact temperature. So tip 2, and probably one of the most important, is to use the amount of fuel you add to your barbecue to control the temperature rather than the vents. So the more fuel you add, the hotter the temperature will be. The less fuel you add, you can keep it a little bit lower. Your vents are really only used to fine tune that temperature. So if you're aiming for a roasting temperature, add enough fuel to reach that temperature. If you find it's creeping a little bit, you can shut the vents down a little. But if you have way too much fuel in, you're going to struggle even with the vents to knock that temperature down. The tip number 3 is to use briquettes rather than lumpwood charcoal. This is more so in the beginning whenever you're still getting used to temperature control, but a briquette is a uniform size and they're all exactly the same. So if you add the same number of briquettes to a cook each time, you should get the same temperature. Lumpwood charcoal can vary quite a bit in size and density and how it burns, so getting that exact temperature each time can be a little bit of a struggle. So by using briquettes at the start, you know it's a consistent size and therefore it should be a consistent temperature, so it's one variable you're taking out of the mix. So tip number 4 is to use a chimney starter to measure out your fuel. In a 57cm barbecue such as the Weber kettle, filling your chimney starter right to the top with briquettes will give you a high temperature of around 250 degrees Celsius. Filling them halfway between the top hole and the top, so roughly around 2/3 full, will give you a roasting temperature of around 180 to 200 Celsius. Then filling the chimney starter to around halfway will give you a low roasting temperature of around 140, 150 degrees Celsius. So hitting those points will help you get into the right ballpark each time. On a smaller 47cm barbecue then, these points all come down a step. So your midway point between your top hole and the top of the chimney starter, on a 47cm barbecue, this is your higher temperature of 250 degrees. Your halfway point then will give you your 180 to 200 degrees roasting temperatures. So depending on the size of your barbecue, so 57 was the first set of measurements, the 47cm is the second set of measurements. Tip number 5 is to use a barbecue with some kind of hood thermometer. Most barbecues nowadays do have a hood thermometer on them, so that'll tell you what the ambient temperature is inside your barbecue. If the barbecue you have doesn't have a hood thermometer, you can buy one of the little cheap oven thermometers and set that onto the cooking grate, and it'll give you an idea of what your cooking temperatures are. Or ideally then, if you don't have a hood thermometer, you would use a wired probe, and the probe would sit on the cooking grate and give you the ambient temperature inside your barbecue. If your barbecue doesn't have a thermometer, it's a little bit like driving a car without a speedometer. You have no idea what temperature you're sitting at, and whilst the chimney starter will give you an idea of what range you're in, you still don't know how accurate you are with those measurements. Okay, tip number 6 is to allow the temperature to settle in your barbecue before you put your food on. So whenever you light your coals in the chimney starter and tip them out into the barbecue, put your cooking grate on and close the lid and let your temperature come up and settle a little bit before you add your food. That way, if your temperature starts to run a little hot, you can do something about it before your food's actually on the barbecue. So once your temperature has settled, if you find it's a little bit hot, the best way to get the temperature down is to remove some of the fuel. You can adjust the vents, but the slightest movement in those vents can have a dramatic effect on the temperature. So removing fuel can be a little bit dangerous too. You don't want to actually lift them out of the barbecue, but if you're using briquettes, if you stab those with your tongs or utensils, they'll actually break apart and fall down through the charcoal grate and therefore extinguish them, and that can bring your temperature down a little bit. If you find your barbecue isn't hot enough or you haven't reached that target temperature you had, at this point you can just add more fuel to it. So just throw some unlit briquettes in on top of the already lit ones and give it a few minutes then to take light and bring that temperature up. Okay, and the seventh and final tip is to take note of how much fuel you used and what temperature it achieved. So I did a video about this a couple of weeks ago, I'll link it up here, but keeping note of how many briquettes you added or what level in your chimney starter you added into the barbecue and what your resulting temperature was will allow you to then go back and adjust it next time. So if you added 2/3 of a chimney starter and you found it was sitting a little bit high for your barbecue, you can add slightly less next time to hit that target temperature. So those are the 7 basic tips to try and help you master controlling the temperature on your charcoal barbecue. It is a learning curve, it will take time, and the first time you do it you might struggle to maintain that temperature, but make notes on what went well and what didn't go well, and then next time adjust for that. So another thing I think I should mention is that the weather can have a dramatic effect on the temperature of your barbecue. My Weber kettle is a black kettle, so that's a black metal barbecue sitting out in direct sunlight. The hood thermometer in that can read around 50 degrees Celsius before I ever add any fuel to it. So on a warm sunny day, if your barbecue is sitting out in full sun, you may need to add a little bit less fuel to it to achieve your temperature. On the other side of that, if it's a cold, wet, rainy day, if the rain's beating off the hood of your barbecue and sapping the heat out of it, you might need to add a little bit more fuel to hit those temperatures and keep them up. On a really windy day, if your barbecue's not sheltered, you may find that having both your bottom and top vents wide open is allowing too much air to blow up through and the temperature's creeping up in your barbecue because the coals are being fired up too much. So on a really windy day, if you can't shelter the barbecue, that might be one of the times you want to knock them bottom vents down a little just to restrict some of that airflow going through the coals. So I hope you find those tips useful. I hope you take them away and put them into practice, and hopefully it will make it a little bit easier for you to master controlling the temperature on your charcoal barbecue. It's a big subject and it's one that might take time to learn, so if you have any questions please leave them in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them. Give the video a thumbs up if you found it useful, and if you haven't already please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to be notified anytime I release a video, and I'll see you in the next episode.